saw lots of students walking out of metro schools and walking to the Capitol today. Who's there?
Yeah, so earlier in the day, the coalition had showed up as scheduled. They arrived at 8 and they were going to leave at 5. And then about noon, we got word that that classes were walking out. And so we got on the SAS and we saw about 100 to 150 people making their way down to the Capitol. And just throughout the day, representatives started coming in, and senators and pastors and commissioners, and literally people all over the city were joining. At the Capitol right now, I've been kind of chilling for the past 2 hours, editing and trying to upload content. So I
Mm.
haven't got a chance to head over there and check in. But we're outside right now, the prayer ritual from the governor's mansion, and there's a significant amount of people, way higher than I've seen the past 3 nights that I've been here. So
Okay. Take me back to summer of 2020 when you began covering Jones's case, Jones's story, and where did this start for the two of you?
For the two of us, a lot of our coverage was centered around the BLM protests that were happening post George Floyd, and really just calling that national conversation of how do we deal with police brutality in America. And then it got scaled down to what were our local issues, what's happening in our own states, and that's when we came across the Jones case and just added it to our um, coverage, and we've been covering it ever since. There's been a very consistent amount of rallies and protesting around this since summer of 2020. And even extending to the huge march that they had earlier this year. That was a big lead up from marching around the city to doing 131 miles all the way to McAllister and rallying for that. So it's truly morphed into something that I don't think really anybody was prepared for. Especially when I first had heard the case, I could never think of being in this moment and feeling this feeling, especially witnessing his family go through the same thing.
Okay. Anna?
Yeah, so last summer, whenever we first heard about this, it was kind of, I wouldn't say passively, but out of nowhere, sort of brought up at one of the protests, like free Julius Jones. If you don't know who that is, you need to look into the case. So it kind of gave us all a bit of homework, and we looked into it. And like Ty said, the march earlier this year, 131 miles, we didn't, we weren't there for the majority of it, but for the very last mile, a lot of people from Oklahoma City and around the state went to McAllister to do the last mile with everyone, and that was just a surreal experience. It was a really large group of people. Most of them drove pretty far just to attend this, and it just kind of proves how much this means to people and how much they believe that he truly is innocent.
Um, who are some of the national and international players, celebrities that have, you know, attached themselves to this case that you've heard about, or I mean, just kind of describe the attention that's been brought to Julius Jones.
Yeah, there's a lot of attention. Over 6 million signatures have been signed on his petition, and not only that, nations are asking for his freedom. I believe it was yesterday the ambassador for the EU sent in a letter to to Governor Stick asking or requesting clemency, and so that was a big step. These aren't just citizens calling for his freedom; these are nations asking for his freedom. And I believe the NAACP, the national organization, has called for his clemency. The ACLU, the Legal Defense Fund, and a few other organizations. But he's gotten a lot of attention, even to the likes of Kim Kardashian, who has been very vocal on his case. And
Viola Davis also produced the ABC episode, The Last Second, which kind of was, I think, sort of the beginning of bringing this national attention to it. I'm not entirely sure when Kim Kardashian joined onto his case, but I know that it was fairly soon around the time that that episode came out. So the nation has been watching for quite a while now.
Okay. It seems there's two separate conversations, not two separate conversations, but there's two different outcomes that could happen here. Um, some are asking for clemency, are asking for, you know, Jones to be found innocent. And then there's also the potential that the governor could commute his sentence, which will ultimately change the consequences. and that kind of opens up the door for more um, legal action. And I guess within for you, I guess for your coverage, what are you looking to next as we wait to hear what the governor decides? Or if, and I believe if he doesn't announce any particular decision, correct me if I'm wrong, but the execution goes on as planned, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So, in terms of best case scenario, I guess realistically, from what we would expect from the governor, is that he would commute his sentence to life with the possibility of parole. That seems relatively reasonable, and I don't really see what his good argument against that could be.
And I also think it's going to be really important that, you know, whatever decision he makes, he will have to live with this for the rest of his life. And people will remember election cycles and throughout his entire life what he did, whether he made the right choice or the wrong choice. And so our coverage is going to continue just to explain the truth for what it is. And so that's our next steps. There's really nothing else you can report other than, we're waiting to see if the governor is going to make this decision.
Okay. Anna, Tyreek, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I wish you both some rest and recovery. And thank you for your work reporting and covering this issue. It's very important to have, witnesses and people documenting for all of us. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
Okay. You guys have a good evening.
You too.
They're right in the middle of it, Augusta.
They're right in the middle of it. And I think this has been really grueling for the reporters who have covered it, and not just for the reporters, for the families. I mean, it's been 20 years of us of an open question, an unfinished, issue for the Howell family and for Jones's family. And now after 20 years, I believe there's over 500 court filings in his case. We're coming down to a question of, you know, clemency, which is what many of his supporters want, which is, you know, innocence for Jones, or commutation, which I've been doing a little research because this is a bit complicated. The governor could choose to basically do whatever he wants at this point. He could decide life without parole. Um, Commuting the sentence opens the door for a continued legal process. The Howell family said in a story that Ashley Holden did earlier this week, and we'll hear from Ashley in just a second. She's another News 9 reporter. That, you know, this there's no end for their family in seeking justice. Paul Howell, who was murdered 20 years ago, Julius Jones was charged for that crime and has been, convicted and imprisoned for that crime for 20 years, and appealing and maintaining his innocence for that crime as well. And that family is saying that, in 3 years he could go through, I believe the clemency process again. So I think there's both families are seeking justice, of course. Let's just for a second go over what some of the options the governor could do. Um, he could grant clemency. He could grant a life with the possibility of parole. He could commute it to life with the possibility without parole. And if he doesn't do any of those things, the scheduled execution will commence tomorrow. Um, Ashley Holden is a News 9 reporter. She's been covering this kind of really at the heart of this case, which is with Paul Howell's family. And Paul Howell was a businessman from Edmond, and Julius Jones's family, who have been advocating for his innocence. And she had some really thoughtful comments today. We talked about 24 hours before the execution is scheduled to happen. Scott, let's go ahead and play her reflections on this case and the experience of these families.
It's been a long, this has gone through so many different legal channels. When you're talking about the Pardon and Parole Board, we've seen Julius Jones be the first death row inmate to go through the commutation process. Then we saw the governor deny the recommendation, say that he wanted him to go through the clemency process. Now we've gone through that as well. I'll tell you from the House perspective, they feel like the cards are stacked against them. They feel like the Pardon and Parole Board made up their mind long before they even got into the room. Um, it was a little bit, it felt like a little bit of deja vu to watch the clemency hearing compared to the commutation hearing. We ended up with the same result. And even members of the Pardon and Parole Board said, you know, I feel the same way as I did when I voted during the commutation hearing. So we have seen, though, this board, you know, is put in place by the governor. So you are really seeing this whole process play out, and now this decision goes back to the governor. So it's interesting. Interesting is not the right word. It's difficult as someone who doesn't have to make the decision to think about making the decision, to have all of this play out, all of the different appeals, this go through all of these different processes, and now it is up to one person. I could not even imagine being a member of the Howell family who has gone through this for 20 plus years, the Jones family who has gone through this for 20 plus years, and now it comes down to the very last, almost exactly now as we're speaking, 24 hours. I don't even know how I would be feeling. I only know that I, as someone who has been covering this case, feels anxious. I have zero control in what happens, and I'll cover obviously what happens, but I can't imagine how they're feeling because I am feeling anxiety.
Oh, that's pretty palpable right there. Listen,
Sure.
Ashley, she's not uh, anywhere near what you would call like my age. She's
Yeah.
been around. She's young. She's been around as a reporter,
Yeah.
and I've worked with her on some stories before. Okay, I've not seen her that anxious before.
Yeah. Yes. I think she is watching. She actually texted me. She couldn't make the live stream, but she texted me to clarify because she is covering this case detail to detail, saying it's commutation. The Pardon and Parole Board says he could reapply every 3 years for commutation if he gets life without parole. So that's the question of the extended legal process that these families would continue to endure um, if the governor chooses to commute Jones's sentence. Um, worth noting that there is still there's the lethal injection protocol that's used that's used for the death penalty in Oklahoma is being challenged in court and goes to trial in February. And so a lot of the concern around this case is about the rush that some are saying is happening when you know the reports of how John Grant was executed 3 weeks ago were disturbing, and medical experts, although I should say the Department of Corrections says everything went as planned, medical experts have said otherwise and suggested that the first drug, midazolam, that's used as a sedative, is being used inappropriately and in doses using a 500 milligram dose of midazolam, which is that first drug that's injected into the inmate. There's no research on the ways that that drug actually affects a human being at that level because it's never administered at that level in a medical setting. So it's kind of so John Grant 3 weeks ago was reported by an AP reporter and a couple others in the room to have vomited, and he seemed to have vomited after that drug while he was trying to breathe, which suggests that the sedative wasn't used, which is a constitutional question, is not decided yet, and that's one of the big concerns with the timing of both John Grant's execution a few weeks ago and Julius Jones's potential execution tomorrow.
So for a lot of folks, they do not remember. Speaking of old, I'm old enough to remember when there was no death penalty in this country by the Supreme Court. I remember that there was, in fact, let me put this out there for folks so they can remember the name of the inmate that was the first person executed after the death penalty was reinstated in this country. His initials were GG, by the way. And Tommy Lee Jones played him in the movie. That's how long ago that was. So one of the things, there was something happened today. Okay, so the Pardon and Parole Board did a ruling today. They recommended clemency for a fellow by the name of Bigler Job
Mm,
Stauffer, however you want to pronounce that. There's two or three folks on the Pardon and Parole Board that are just against the death penalty,
mm,
and there are a lot of people against the death penalty. Okay, and they're going to be against the death penalty regardless. It's interesting. One of the gradients in this, Augusta, as we were talking earlier, is there are media gradients here. Number one, there are some people who are wanting, and I think about folks who are saying he's an innocent man on death row. There are a lot of people that are against the death penalty that I've talked to that go, well, they think he's guilty, but they don't want the death penalty. So
right.
it seems that the media has lumped it into two camps. This the Pardon and Parole Board today, even the people who voted for clemency today said this guy's guilty,
Mm-hmm.
period, and he's lying about what was happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So the Julius Jones case has so many different variations here. I
True.
think that folks like you and Storm and Ashley have done a great job, but there are so many people that are confused about what's going on here. You just went down the list of things that could happen. One
Mm,
of the things that, and I think, and I see a lot of the celebrities on this that have no idea about the intricacies of this. This is a phenomenon, really. When I'm looking across Twitter tonight of the people, I have
mm.
an idea that Governor Stitt's not paying attention to Twitter. So let me ask you this question: what is he paying attention to? I mean, one of the issues that I see right now is there is this complete lack of information coming out of the governor's office. I heard, I think it was last night's News Nine. I'm not sure which reporter talked about it, that he's contemplating right now this, also in prayer, meditating on what should be done here. But I don't know if you've covered death penalty cases before, and you mentioned AP reporter who's covered a lot of these, but
Mm.
is there usually this much blackout of information?
So I I'm trying to think of a good answer to that. I think the lack of clarity from because this case has come down to the governor making the final decision, it seems as if there is a lack of clarity and an extended delay in getting an answer. And I can only speculate on the reasons for the governor's delay. Um, but I think he's still within his rights to not respond at this time. I mean, I think it's just a matter of, um, what's best for the case and for, a community and a state. I think everybody's eyes are on what's going to happen in McAllister tomorrow. Um, and so I think that the sense of delay is unexpected. I don't know about unexpected, but I mean, it's definitely not, there's definitely no force appointed the Pardon and Parole Board that recommended um, clemency. And then it hasn't, he hasn't accepted that recommendation. And then there's the added layer of, um, you know, Bigler Stouffer being recommended as well, even though they think he's guilty, purely because their comments from the Pardon and Parole Board today express that they're really concerned about the way that he would die if they did recommend him for lethal injection. And I don't know if that's within their. I don't think that's within the board's. Um, I don't know if it's their assignment to make recommendations based on the method of the way the death penalty would be administered. Um, I don't think that it is, but um, the the fact that these executions are happening now instead of after February, when that question would be answered by the courts of whether or not this method of lethal injection is cruel and unusual and inhumane, that question won't be resolved when these people are potentially killed. So that seems unclear, doesn't it?
It does, and I do recall a few years ago, whenever just before the Glossop execution, of course, did not go off, and then there were two executions. The term that was used that I didn't ever hear it again is the word botched.
Mm,
Um, so which I don't know what that means. They didn't go as planned. Let's put it that way.
right.
And so there was a whole lot of discussion at that time. It's hard to get the drugs from Europe. Europe people in charge of the drugs didn't want those coming over here.
Right.
There's so many layers to this. I was going to answer my own question from a few minutes ago. In the past, we've seen DOC directors be very visible at this time, very,
Mm,
very visible. So this is a change from my perspective that DOC and governors being this quiet is somewhat unusual. And I think the comments that I've heard today have been in great sympathy for Julius Jones' family, as well as for Paul Howell's family. I
sure.
mean, they're all going through this together with this sense of unknown. No
Mm,
matter where a person is on this particular scale, and of course for Julius Jones, who's sitting there tonight as well, this sense of uncertainty is what I'm seeing so many comments and negative comments, not just, of course, the actual act itself, the death penalty, but
mm,
nonetheless, this sense of uncertainty is something that I would think that maybe policymakers in the future are going to reconsider being this radioactively quiet
right.
going into something like this. So if something comes up on this before we're off here in a little bit, we'll let you know. But is
Absolutely.
it? Can you tell us what the plan is right now for News 9 News on 6 coverage tomorrow, Augusta?
Yes. Ashley Holden, Carl Torp will be in McAllister tomorrow. I believe Ashley is going to have her name. Ashley and Carl are going to have their names in the media center to possibly be selected to watch the execution. News 9 did not have a reporter selected for John Grant's execution a few weeks ago. Um, and then I will be there as well. I'll be outside, and I believe Carl will be outside with the community, and I will be live streaming interviews and doing lots of kind of live digital coverage. So watch the News 9 News on 6 apps. I'll probably make sure that Carl and Ashley have an opportunity to discuss what they're seeing and as they're doing it. So we'll be kind of, the morning show. I believe our morning crews are are there already and will be, so from the 4 a.m. show through the day we'll have live coverage and a live presence in McAllister. And then we're anticipating some response from the community here in Oklahoma City, so we'll have reporters wherever wherever those events take place.
Let me get to folks who are watching this and want to know what's going on. So, why don't we go ahead, Augusta? Why don't you tell people about? And I was looking through. I feel bad about not
Absolutely.
knowing your Twitter handle right now, as well as Ashley's and Carl's. But if you would,
Mine's Augusta Reports because my last name doesn't fit in the thing. So, yeah. So it's Augusta Reports is my Twitter handle. I'll be on Twitter, of course, all day tomorrow. Augusta McDonnell News 9 is my Facebook page. I'll be going live from that page and probably from the News 9 page as well. So, um,
and I've
you'll
got Ashley V. Holden. Um, so you can do also if you're on Twitter, you can. It's at News 9 and at News on 6, and we'll figure out what Torps is.
oh, here,
So
find Carl's.
and he's the tall one.
Yes, Carl is the tall, dark-haired afternoon anchor, and he
It,
covered the John Grant execution. He was there, gives a great report. Um,
Carl Torp, News 9.
yeah, Carl Thorpe, News 9, and of course, all of our work will be diverted to the News 9 and News on 6 pages as well. So
Carl with a K.
Carl with a K, yes.
Karltorp. All right, so that's, and what time is this all happening tomorrow?
I believe, I believe the, I believe 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. is the actual scheduled time of execution, unless, let me confirm that.
All right, we will
and
find that out.
unless there's a decision from the governor. Okay, it's at 4 p.m. So
Okay.
the governor could call at the last minute tomorrow at 3:59 to stay the execution. He could do it that late, but 4 p.m.
Someone called today or said he has to do it today. Oh, haven't you watched movies? The governor called at the last minute.
And
That's
that's the
how this
thing.
works.
And there are, stories of inmates going through getting their last meal like 2 or 3 times, saying goodbye to their families 2 or 3 times. And I think it's I've actually been kind of reflecting on the question of like, why is this so, like, when John Grant's leading up to John Grant's execution a few weeks ago, who had a lot less. I mean, he had stabbed a kitchen worker to death while in jail. There was no question of his guilt or innocence. It was a different conversation, and there was less coverage of his, or less public following on his execution. But I felt the same sense of unease because I think we tend to feel that death is an unexpected event. Death is something like we report on death all the time here, almost daily. But it's the fact that this time and date is planned and expected that I can't quite personally wrap my mind around in the same way as I think about, say, a car wreck where somebody's killed, something along those lines. So I think there's a lot of unease in the community, and I'm actually getting a text from Tyreek Baker right now. He's saying things are getting really tense at the Capitol. He's sending me videos. So I think there's going to be some developments during this show. What's going on at the Capitol?
Augusta, if you have a chance, if those are MP4s,
Yeah.
ship them to that email address that we were working with a while ago, and I'll try to put them up.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got barricades up. There's police there. I will send this to you, and
Okay.
we'll get this in the show.
We'll see how that works out. All right. So what we'll do is I need Edge to go away. Thank you. Let's change to a different topic
Okay.
for a little bit.
Let's do. Sounds good.
There was, I got to tell you, a couple of things that have happened with the Biden administration. One is that they have been, I think Democrats in particular, is this infrastructure, and there's still the Build Back Better, which is 1.5 trillion, something like that, the companion bill the progressive have been holding out on. If there was a criticism, and it's easy to sit in the cheap seats and throw the peanuts, but the point is that if there was a valid criticism of what has been happening with these two bills over the last 6 months, it has been that there has been a concentration on the amount, the numbers, which I think Republicans have been really good at exploiting. That's the most expensive bill. What they've not done, they being the Democrats, is they've not explained what was in it. And as we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, Republicans like to spend money too. So, they try to all make their points. And you remember with the first big stimulus bill, there was a Republican president, Republican Senate, Republican House. And so, no, it's a Democrat House rather. But the fact is, bipartisan, they'll spend the money, and they're going to spend the money here. One of the things, as I get ready to introduce the guest, Augusta, is when we started talking about this bill, it became pretty clear that the members of our delegation, all of whom are Republican, were going to vote against. And so privately, my conversations have been, well, are you going to send the money back? Well, you know what the answer is. Huh? It's more like the little red hen, right? So no,
Right.
we're going to spend every nickel. And what I was struck with several months ago is when I was talking to Representative Logan Phillips. Now, Logan Phillips was elected 2 elections ago. He defeated the Senate, the House Minority Leader, and he didn't spend a nickel. He signed up and won. And it was in the Signal Corps, in the military. Speaker McCall anointed him as the go-to person on broadband issues that we have in Oklahoma. We are one of the worst states in the nation, 48, 49, take your pick of whatever poison you want as to how bad broadband is in Oklahoma, largely because we're very rural, R-U-R-A-L. And so when we started talking with Logan about it, I think I had him on hot seat, Augusta, and I asked him that, and I said, "You still going to spend the money if your colleagues are against it in the federal delegation?" He goes, "Every nickel." So I interviewed him today, and And I said, "You going to send the money back?" He's, "No, we're going to spend every nickel." Now, where we had been, and it's interesting. I saw a story just before we came on the air. I was reading a story, I think Nondoc, about this discussion now about the Oklahoma County facility, where that
Yes.
some activists were pushing back on the reports that actually we broke this about 3 weeks ago with Commissioner Mon saying we've made all these improvements. And the story basically was responding to Mon doing an op-ed in the Daily Oklahoma. Well, he was on here way before the op-ed talking about the very same thing. We had video of that, and he detailed that. And what has happened, and people have reached out since that to say, okay, well, the infrastructure is one thing, but there's also the services. And remember, there's a lot of folks there that have mental illness challenges, physical
Mhm.
challenges, health challenges. Tulsa has taken this on. Most observers, I think, that are unbiased, look at it and say Tulsa's doing it a little better, or maybe a lot better.
Mhm.
But the facility down in Oklahoma County is a problem, and people don't want to hear this. But sooner or later, Oklahoma County is going to have to get themselves a new jail. Just
Yeah.
bottom line, okay?
Mhm.
So one of the things that has been discussed is with Jeff Dismukes with Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. When we started discussing after the infrastructure, what do you do with the building? How do you deal with the folks down there? Because remember the notice is always the narrative. It's the largest mental health holding facility in the state of Oklahoma. Well, then what kind
Mhm.
of services are you delivering? And a lot of
Right.
folks, North Care does a great job, but a lot of experts will say you can't deliver mental health services in a correctional facility. That's all above my pay grade. The point is, there's a bunch of infrastructure money coming to Oklahoma that could impact mental health, general health in areas. We talked with the docs on Monday night about telehealth. So I'm saying all this to set this up. Logan Phillips was on. We know how much money is in the bill. It went from, I think he details exactly what this is. It's an enormous amount of money, and it's going to be deployed in a way that is to be seen. And I asked him, and I don't know if it's in this clip, but I said we have to wait on the legislature to appropriate the money. He was like, "No, we got stuff going on right now." So I got two clips of Logan Phillips today talking specifically about these issues. And for folks who weren't here Monday night, I've got a couple of clips of Jeff Dismukes talking about what might be done to impact our mental health numbers and specifically what might happen in terms of incarceration and how we might not have to have so many people with mental challenges in those facilities. It's a long debate. We all know you don't get to it quick. Here's Logan Phillips with item number one.
The last time we spoke, I thought maybe the state of Oklahoma would get $30-40 million through ARPA funded COVID relief funding that we could build out some broadband and the rest of it would be focused on those traditional infrastructures. And that's just not the case. With the ARPA funding, the state of Oklahoma received about $1.9 billion. And that's just for the legislator to a legislative body to actually partner out. You can add in things like the tribal monies that came in for the sovereign nations, the county monies came out to about 1.3 billion together with all the county monies. It's a tremendous amount of funds just for the ARPA, with a tremendous amount of them earmarked for broadband because the federal government finally defined broadband connectivity as a traditional infrastructure. Now, we have this second bill setting out, which is the 1.2 trillion with a T dollar infrastructure bill that just passed out of the House, the Senate, and was signed by President Biden, I believe yesterday, either morning or afternoon. I'm not real sure. And in that, we are earmarked tremendously for broadband, not just for the state, but here in Oklahoma. And the numbers are all over the place. You're right. The numbers are changing daily, but we do have some minimum numbers. We know that out of that $1.2 trillion, the state of Oklahoma is going to get at least a bare minimum of $100 million just for broadband expansion. And then we have another $163 million in a capital expenditures fund that is pretty much earmarked for broadband as well. And then we have a bunch of little pots that are going to serve those historically unserved or underserved areas, places that have never had connectivity. We have $2.7 billion for the nation going to digital literacy to help with our senior citizens, to help with new up and coming students to learn how to connect for the first time and learn how to use those computers. We have $32.2 billion specifically for the rural areas to throw out broadband into just areas that have never had connectivity before. Of course, that's statewide number or nationwide numbers, but historically, Oklahoma has always received about 1% of these national figures. So if we're talking national figures of 4.25 billion, that's 42 more million. 32 billion for the historic unserved areas, that's 32 extra million. These quickly add up to pots of like 500 to 750 million dollars just for broadband expansion once this all is settled and looking out. And that's not looking at stuff like the USDA grants, the NFIT grants, other types of grant systems are out there that also have billions of dollars in them. So we're going to see boots on the ground, the single largest infrastructure build out in the state's history. This is going to blow that 1920s rural electrification out of the water. It's going to be like anything we've ever seen before. They're talking about figuring out a way to make connectivity to every single home now.
$250 million for Oklahoma infrastructure. Now, I know Ted Cruz is going to be excited about that. Used to talk about $250 million plus for Oklahoma infrastructure. Remember when they loosed the dam in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, and they all at the end of the movie they hooked the wire up,
Yes, and the cows are
electrified the whole
floating by,
country.
and
Yeah, it's going to happen here. It's like he said this. What Logan Phillips said. He says that's going to dwarf that electrification act in the 1920s. It's a pretty stunning amount of money, Augusta.
it's a stunning amount of money. And I think it's interesting the way that we're talking about infrastructure in terms of mental health and in terms of the access that can be provided by, increasing broadband and, supporting schools in that way and improving roads and just access statewide. It'll be interesting to see all of the programs and projects that come out of this money.
Okay, now specifically, I asked him a couple other questions about mental health and incarceration. Now, we're having a criminal justice discussion. We've been having it for some time now about what constitutes criminal justice reform. There are some, let's just put it this way: lots of different variations of this. One person's criminal justice reform might be way too loose for another one. But here's the whole point. This issue is going to be coming to a head real soon just because of budgets and some of the money that's out there that could be impacting people for retraining, these sorts of things. And this, by the way, this video, well, I'll be shipping it to Ryan Wilson tonight. So it'll soon be on News 9, News on 6 for the entire Logan Phillips interview, which we get into. We really go down the rabbit hole on a lot of these, but the fact is pretty exciting. But specifically for people who are interested in what's happening at the Tulsa County Detention Center, the Oklahoma County Detention Center, all these discussions, all these years about, yes, we've got mental health challenges. We need to start funding this. Well, I would say that the funding is there. You have Republican lawmakers like Logan Phillips, who's the point guy for Charles McCall on this, Speaker McCall. And I asked him specifically about what this money could be doing for reducing incarceration, reducing recidivism, and helping people who have mental illness who may be being forced into the legal system.
Well, let's start off with the commentary first. The reality is Oklahoma has about 30% of our population suffering from some form of mental health problem, depression, suicidal thoughts, those addiction-based issues. It is tremendously large amount of population. We're talking 400,000 plus people of our Oklahoma population. We're 31 in the nation in mental health. That's a terrible number to have. But the reality is we're 80% of our physical land mass is unserved by connectivity. 385,000 of our students don't have internet connectivity at home. There's no ability for them to reach out through telehealth to get those mental health services. Last session, I actually passed a resolution naming the month of November, where we're at right now, as Men's Health Awareness, to raise health awareness for mental health, prostate cancer, those type of things, because we see that the suicide rates, especially in our young teens during this pandemic the last 2 years, has simply skyrocketed. The isolation, the lack of control in their lives, these have led people, the loss of jobs and livelihoods, to start destroying their own lives, to start taking their own lives. The mental health crisis is peaking, not just in here in Oklahoma, though we are one of the worst. It's peaking across the nation, and it's not getting better. Now, there's some ways we can take and deal with the situation. One of the big problems is we simply don't have mental health services in our rural communities. You get outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma City, to be able to get to a therapist or a psychologist or anyone to speak to is extremely difficult. When you have no cell phone coverage and you have no internet connectivity and you can't have a doctor that's in the town, what's your opportunity? You're going to turn to things like meth. You're going to turn to abusing substances. You're going to turn to those things that quiet the demons in your head, and quiet those voices and those awful thoughts you're having. Um, so if we're going to overcome that, we have to be looking at this connectivity issue so that we can bring in doctors, not just from here in Oklahoma, but from everywhere, to get resources to our elderly are suffering horribly. We're seeing massive spikes in the retirement communities and to the elder homes because they have been blocked off from their loved ones for almost 2 years now. So we have to find new and creative ways to bring in those resources, bring back that human connection, and start treating these issues.
One of the things that's probably underreported is that the if we have these sorts of numbers amongst the general population of mental illness and challenges right now, our correctional facilities have got to have, if not more, percentage of those same sorts of problems. I know in Oklahoma County we've been talking about some improvements at the jail that go virtually unnoticed amongst general media, and I'm wondering, are there things in this bill that would allow you to go into these facilities, which have an enormously, according to reports, enormously high amount of people with mental health challenges to get some treatment? Although I know that's a difficult thing for mental health providers to do treatment inside of incarcerated in sort of correction facilities. But do you see something there in terms of this money, this infrastructure money, helping in that regard?
Well, absolutely. We have the money's earmarked for COVID relief, and then of course the infrastructure money is made their earmarked to build out those systems that we need. So there's tremendous pots of monies for dealing with mental health and the prison population. I, the reality in Oklahoma, since 1983, our population has increased about 276%. We have about 26,000 or so people in the Oklahoma judicial system that are justice involved right now. And you're right, the mental health issues there are tremendous. But the depression issues are the same just in our population with higher numbers. The lack of hope is a huge thing. So one of the things in the ARPA inside the COVID is ability to create workforce programs. Some of those prisoners, to help with recidivation rates, we can actually create employees from them, train them to skills so that when they get out of prison, they have hope of a better life, that they can become contributing members of society. In the tech field, we have negative 22% unemployment rate right now. There is nothing stopping one of our justice involved individuals from learning how to run fiber lines, learning how to do cutting edge broadband and connectivity technology, getting out of the prison and having a career path that is successful. And we know that if you can get somebody to work, that they're making money, they're being successful, that their children are going to be better off. There's going to be less likelihood of that multi-generational justice involvement. So there's fingers of this that's going to go and branch out in a variety of different ways, but there's absolutely money there to help in the prison populations, to break down those recidivation rates, and help that particular population get to be members of our society.
Money talks.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's sunk in just how much it's going to be for the state in the areas we have some problems. Can I play one quick clip, Augusta, from Monday night
Absolutely.
that we
Absolutely.
didn't get to with the docs? And I was kind of pointing at the stories that we have, which we tend to be in the media. We tend to gravitate towards the loud stories, and that's just kind of the way it is, and that's where everybody gravitates, right, to the coverage. Some of the quieter stories you don't see as much. That's what when News 9 does the stories about some good news and things that are going on that normally don't get covered. One of the things Jeff Dismix, who was on with the docs on Monday night, Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, saying, we've got to hear people like us. We've got to be doing a better job in telling the success stories. The failure stories always get there. A person
Right.
gets out of jail, they go commit a crime. It's interesting what he had to say. And he wasn't really pointing at the media. He actually kind of defended the media. But this is a real short clip, but he's talking about the wholesomeness and the goodness of stories of success and why we need to concentrate more on those because they lift other people up. Here's that bite from Jeff Dismukes.
Well, I always want more attention to these issues, and it's not all in the media. There are a lot of us within our world. We need to do more. Really talk about those good things and get that out and share that with people. Certainly, you've done quite a bit to bring those positives out, but it's important for us to maybe engage more within the community, talk to people, help them to break down some of those barriers, the things that are blocking them from getting care. Uh, you know, as I said earlier, and going to mention the success stories that I hear about and I get to see. I want everyone to be able to see this. So I think it's easy to focus on the negative. Sometimes it sometimes takes a little bit more for us to talk about the positives. But I promise you, the positives outweigh those negatives, and it's important for us to talk about it. So I hope that working together, we can maybe elevate that a little bit.
I hope so too.
I hope so. I mean, there's such a stigma around mental health issues that people lean on substances or whatever coping mechanism they go to feel okay. And um, there's so my one of the stations I first reported at was in Montana, my home state, and there, I mean, Montana has the highest rates of suicide, alcohol abuse, veteran suicide. It's just, it can be a tough place to access mental health care. And it was about 2017 where it seemed to me, as kind of a young reporter in that area at the time, that there was a big push for telemedicine. And there's some rural aspects of Montana that mirror what we see in Oklahoma. In the winter, you don't want to drive for an hour and a half to try and see your counselor, to see your therapist, to see whoever manages your medications. I mean, there are some very basic access issues when it comes to mental health care that we don't tend to think about, and that's after somebody takes the time to get themselves care. And long wait times. People who need help now have to wait 2 months after they get to the point that they're even able to ask for help. And you know, the community can do a lot to resource and to kind of put their arms around people with mental health needs, which is every adult at some point in their life. It's everybody at some point in their life. So it's cool to see those investments coming into play. And sometimes it comes down to, can you Skype with your psychiatrist? I think psychiatrists have to have a face-to-face call with somebody to prescribe a medication. I think that's the law. I'd have to check in Oklahoma. It was the law in Montana and the law in California when I did different reporting there. So to access telemedicine, which opens up, a range of availability for people all over the state, some of these broadband issues and, just infrastructure questions could play a big part in supporting better mental health care.
Yeah, rural states, it's tough, but it could be worse. You could have been from Wyoming. That Kevin Costner guy is really mean, but that's on a different one. So, all right, well, what a great place to grow up in. Well, Oklahoma's a great place to grow up in too. We've just got some fundamental issues that have to be solved, and a lot of it
Oklahoma's
has to do with
fabulous.
our health outcomes. And so
Yeah,
maybe this is a good start. I do appreciate Logan Phillips for taking time this morning. That entire interview is going to be up on News 9 very soon. We'll tweet that out,
great.
put it on our page. Any last thoughts before we sign off, Augusta, on what you're hearing tonight on the Julius Jones situation? Anything new? And then if you would also, the second half of that question, to remind viewers about what's in store tomorrow.
Yes, I do have some new things, Scott. I was trying to send you this file, but honestly, by the time we export it, download, etc., things may have changed. So we're getting reports that somebody was arrested at the Capitol. Um, And so the video that I saw, just go on the News 9, go, check out News 9. We have reporters and photographers headed to the Capitol and the governor's mansion now. I think there are, well, I think there's going to be some activity in these crowds this evening. So we have reporters there now, and tomorrow we'll have teams in McAllister at the penitentiary from our 4 a.m. shows on up. So execution is scheduled to happen at 4 p.m. And I think there's going to be lots to be paying attention to between now and then after that into the evening hours as well. So yeah, definitely check on the News 9 app, News on 6 apps, and digital, and of course catch the newscasts.
You could go on those if you have Roku, Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV.
Yeah.
So if you go on to the OTT aspect, you've got one of those TCL TVs. We've got them all over the place here, and put those OTT apps. You can, by the way, you can watch the 6 a.m. News on 6 news, right? If you want to see what's going on in Tulsa. So you've got to do that. It really connects our world. All right, that's what we have for tonight. Augusta, thanks so much. Pass on to Ashley our appreciation for her taking her time. I know that she's not going to sleep tonight. Most of our reporters down there that are headed that way are not going to either. And our prayers with all the families on this. This is excruciating.
It's excruciating. It is.
It's the sort of thing that's tough to take. There's a great division in the community about this. I understand. I hope that everything down around the Capitol tonight's peaceful.
Yes.
And so do appreciate your helping us out tonight to get us a good handle on what's going on. So for Augusta McDonnell, I'm Scott Mitchell. We'll see you next Wednesday. We will have an event. I know it's Thanksgiving Eve next Wednesday. So, have some pumpkin pie and whatever toddy or hot
and a dose of news. Yes.
Yeah, we'll get you a dose of news.